Nuclear was first developed in the 50s, but it hasn't panned out the way many predicted. What happened, and is nuclear the energy of the future? Let's dive into that. Before we dive in, let's take a look at the big picture. Energy usage and energy deployment has grown exponentially in the past, but it has stagnated since the 70s. Why is that? The development and usage of energy has gone through many revolutions, but most recently it has stopped. But if we don't want that to stagnate, where do we get this energy from? Let's say we want to get it from the sun. We have 10,000 times more energy than what the world uses today. But the problem with solar is that the sun doesn't shine everywhere all the time. There's nighttime, there are clouds, and we need to store that energy with expensive batteries. What if instead of taking the leftovers of what the sun produces, we actually created our own sun? That's what the promise of nuclear provides. We have to have nuclear powered everything. Nuclear homes, we should have nuclear cars, whether flying or not, and even nuclear batteries. So if the future is clearly nuclear, why hasn't it happened yet? You can get nuclear power through two different processes, nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission is what we see in the world today. You basically get uranium atoms to collide against each other, and in the process it creates krypton and barium. These new particles will hit other particles of uranium that will create a chain reaction, releasing energy in form of heat. That heat vaporizes water, that in turn turns a turbine, and that generates electricity. As the name explains, nuclear fusion is the exact opposite of fission. Instead of bouncing two atoms together to break them apart, in fusion we join them together. And it replicates exactly what happens in the sun's core. That is, nuclear fusion is the power of stars. And instead of using uranium or plutonium, in nuclear fusion, you use hydrogen isotopes that are forms of hydrogen. You use deuterium, which is heavy water, and tritium, which is used in glow exit signs. Deuterium is a stable element, and tritium radioactivity doesn't last that long. Besides being safer, the fusion fuel is more abundant and much cheaper than fission power. You can extract deuterium from seawater, and tritium can be extracted from nuclear fusion itself. And it's crazy the amount of energy that it can produce with very little nuclear power sources. With only 0.1 grams of deuterium and 0.3 grams of tritium, it can produce enough energy for a whole year for one American. That's a ton of energy. But the big difference between fusion and fission is that fission byproducts are highly radioactive. And on top of that, the fission reaction, if not controlled properly, can create a chain reaction and either causing a nuclear meltdown or explosion, which happened in Fukushima in 2011. That doesn't happen in nuclear fusion at all. That is, nuclear fusion is much safer. Nuclear fusion happens inside a tokamak. A tokamak is a donut-shaped reactor where you put the hydrogen and you heat it up to 100 million degrees Celsius, which it turns to plasma. Under these conditions, the particles collide and fuse together, just like the sun. And a safety net for nuclear fusion is that you can just stop the fuel source and the process just stops. So it's much safer than fission. But the problem is that nobody has ever produced a nuclear fusion reactor that produces more energy than it takes in. That's just yet. To assess how well a nuclear power reactor performs, we can look at fusion energy gain factor, or Q. If Q is greater than 1, then the thermal power out is greater than the thermal power in. Nuclear reactors are now trying to reach Q greater than 1. Q greater than 1 just means that they are practical, but we actually need Q to be around 10 or 25 because it needs to account to everything that the nuclear reactor needs. There are two great developments last year. The joint European torus reached a Q of 0.67 and the National Ignition Facility reached a Q of 0.7 just last year. But there are even more interesting developments happening in the close future. There are three major developments Two of them are the ITER program and the Helium Company, which are both trying to produce a nuclear reactor with Q between 10 and 25. But I want to focus on a startup based in Cambridge. This company is a spin-off of MIT Research, and the company is called Commonwealth Fusion Systems, and they're building Spark in the next 3 years. The way they achieve that is by using superconducting magnets that can actually achieve a much higher magnetic field at high temperatures. ITER uses a much older technology, and their superconducting materials need to be as cold as 4 Kelvin. But recently, scientists discovered how to produce these high-temperature superconducting materials at high quantities. Improving these magnets is what CFS is doing, so they can produce magnets that are much more powerful, helping with their nuclear reactors. As a stronger magnetic power translates to a 10 times greater energy production for the nuclear reactor. As a result, MIT is able to produce a nuclear reactor with net energy gain at a much smaller design. The nuclear reactor developed by CFS is 2% of the size that ITER is designing. That's a much smaller nuclear reactor. And their recent developments. In 2021, they got a full-size magnet that's basically a slice of the tokamak, and they generate around 20 Tesla of magnetic force. That's a ton of magnetic force. There are tons of steps between Spark and the commercial construction of nuclear power, but we're one step closer to reaching that goal. And that's amazing news. After making Spark, CFS plans to create ARC, and that's a homage to Iron Man ARC's nuclear reactor. We'll see when we start producing nuclear fusion power. It might be in the next 10 years. Let's remain hopeful. And with a lot of energy, we can produce even more goods. Let's hope for the best. I hope you liked this video. If you liked, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. Bye.